I'm here to talk about one of my current honours projects at Rhodes University, and I'm looking at the idea of whether we should be managing duckweed and how we would go about doing this by looking at whether it's driven by bottom-up or top-down mechanisms in two Eastern Cape rivers. So just to introduce duckweed, it is a general term given to three different species of floating macrophyte in the Lemnaceae family. For the process of, for my project, I'm looking at them as a whole rather than trying to separate individual species because they become very intertwined in these areas. It proliferates hugely in still water and can form extremely dense mats. These dense mats can stop any sunlight from reaching the submerged aquatic plants, and this reduces the amount of oxygen within the water. This has similar effects to plants such as water hyacinth and water lettuce that we've heard a lot about. But it's known as a ubiquitous plant, so at the moment it's not seen as being invasive. But it's possibly becoming invasive, and this is why we're starting to look at it. It has 15 families known to be associated with it. These are specialist herbivores found in places like New York. So part of the project is also to find out whether we have any of these specialist herbivores actually in South Africa. So for my methods, I took 2-litre ice cream tubs, removed the bottom and replaced it with fine cut nitrogen mesh. I then took 6 samples at each site and removed all the macroinvertebrates from these samples within 72 hours, and then identified all of them. Each sample was then dried as well and weighed in order to get a biomass measure, and nutrient data was taken. We also then took additional information on the surrounding plants and weather in order to make sure that these aren't affecting it as well. So the study sites I've been looking at were 2 sites on the Bushmans River as well as 2 sites on the Bloukrans River. So I've been sampling since January, well since February, so I have some sort of data to show you what has actually been happening. This first graph is just to show the amount of biomass found. Even though the samples are the same per site, you get different amounts of duckweed depending on how much it has proliferated in the area because of the thick mats. So this is why, as you can see here in the Bushmans River, we have a lot more duckweed found in comparison to the Bloukrans River. So this figure 2 is just the average number of organisms found at each site separated into functional feeding groups so that we can see if there are any large amounts of herbivores, generous herbivores that are actually feeding on the plant. As you can tell, it doesn't look like we really have herbivores that are doing significant damage. Although the Bushman site has quite a large amount of herbivores, these are actually terrestrial aphids which have moved onto the plant. And as far as we can tell, they aren't actually doing any feeding damage. They are there in huge amounts, and this is why we have such a large amount of them there. But if you compare with the density, you can see they're not doing any damage. The duckweed's getting worse. Then on the Bloukrans River, we had more predators. We do have some herbivores there on the site 4, but those are mostly chironomids, which were classified as herbivores and predators for this study, because they are known to feed on a wide variety of foods. Then just with figure 3, this is the levels of nitrate and ammonia found per site. So if you look here, the Bushmans River seems to have a much lower amount of nitrate and ammonia. This is due to the fact that on the Bloukrans River, both sites were downstream from a sewage inflow, so they were getting nitrate and ammonia from this source as well as being next to farmlands, which fertilizer could have been influencing them. Whereas the Bushman sites don't have as much human influence, but now if you compare against the biomass of the plant, we have huge masses of this duckweed in the more pristine river, which is quite a scary idea. So just to conclude with this, it doesn't appear that there's an influence by nutrient levels. Neither do we have any specialist herbivores that have so far been found on the plant. So this could indicate that there's nothing really feeding on it. Maybe there's a possibility of some fish that do feed on it slightly, as well as some generalists, but they don't seem to be doing any damage. But now when we start to compare this picture, the top picture is from January, and the picture below is from February. It looks as though the farmer has actually released some sort of water down into the river from a sluice gate or so. And as you can see, it clears the duckweed extremely fast. So this may be why in some areas we've got such huge amounts of duckweeds in comparison to others, because of the fluctuations in water flow. But this also may track back to if there's a huge amount of nutrients and the water becomes still, the duckweed proliferates.